Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a special screencast-o-matic recording for the lesson on Federalism and the Constitution. In this particular part of the lesson, we're going to be doing two readings and answering questions that coincide with the readings. So please just make sure that you either read along and or fill in the questions as the content is being conveyed to you. Let's go ahead and get started. Of course, the part that I'm referencing here in the lesson is right after the crash course section. We're going to go to a quick reading from iCivics on state powers and understanding more about what states and local governments can in fact do under our system of federalism. And then of course moving on into current events in regards to COVID. Think about this question before we start our reading. Has federalism as a principle of government that's in our Constitution helped or hurt the American process and American experience on handling a global pandemic? And so in this way, we're going to think about some of the things that work for us and against us with our system of federalism in place, of course, via the Constitution. So let's go ahead and get started with the first reading right here. And this is from iCivics. State power. Got a reservation? States have power. If you've ever been to a wedding, you probably heard the officiant wrap things up by saying, "By the power vested in me by the state of blank, I now pronounce the person performing the wedding got the power to perform weddings from the state." But where did the state get the power to give that power? Little countries? If you look up the word state in the dictionary, one of the definitions will sound a lot like the definition for country. That's because state is another word for country or nation. A state is the political unit that has the authority to govern itself. The United States is a group of states that decided to unite themselves under a single government. When states do that, they are not considered countries, and yet they have their own governments, and they can have their own power too. The Constitution treats states partly as if they were independent countries and partly as small units within one big country. It lets states have power to do a lot of things, but it gives some powers only to the federal government. Hey, that's reserved. The Constitution gives a specific list of powers to the federal government, but even if you read the entire Constitution, you won't find a list of powers for states. Instead, the Constitution says this: "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people." Delegated means assigned or given. Reserved means set aside for. So under the Constitution, if a power isn't specifically given to the federal government, it's a power set aside for the states. Unless the Constitution says it's something states aren't allowed to do, there are no reserved powers for the federal government. It only has the powers the Constitution says it has. Oh, that's no fun. So what can states do? You might want a cool title like Sir Brandon or Princess Caitlin, but you won't be getting one from your state government. It's not allowed. Granting titles of nobility is one of the many things the Constitution says states can't do. It's also something the federal government can't do either. Other no-nos include things that would interfere with the federal government's ability to exercise its own powers. These are things like making treaties with other countries or starting a war. The Constitution also says no to states causing problems for other states. For example, a state can't charge taxes on goods brought in from other states. Next section. Go for it. So what powers have the green light for states? That's like saying you can't have pizza, tacos, or mac and cheese for dinner. Now go list everything you can have. There are lots of powers the Constitution doesn't say anything about at all. There's nothing about education, healthcare, fire protection, police, marriage, driver's licenses, how many dogs you can have, what happens to your stuff when you die, or whether skateboards are allowed at the park. But state and local governments have the power to make rules about all that and much, much more. They exercise this power by adapting or adopting constitutions of their own and by passing their own laws accordingly. Share and share alike. What if the Constitution says the federal government can do something, but doesn't say states can't do it? For example, the Constitution gives the federal government the right to collect taxes, but it doesn't say states can't collect taxes. Does that mean they can both collect taxes? In this case, yes. One collecting taxes doesn't stop the other from collecting taxes. Shared powers are called concurrent powers. Concurrent, by the way, means at the same time. So states can't share a power the Constitution gives only to the federal government. And if sharing a power would cause a conflict, then the power can't be shared. Other concurrent powers include running a court system, enforcing laws, and borrowing money. Speaking of local governments, the Constitution says nothing about counties, cities, towns, boroughs, or any other small unit of government. It's up to the states to decide what kinds of smaller governments to create and what powers those local governments will have. States rely on local government to deliver certain kinds of services to the people. It's because the smaller the unit of government, the closer that government is to the people. States also give local governments the power to make their own decisions about things like whether your dog needs to be on a leash or whether Ugly Mart can build a 100-foot purple store downtown. Local governments are also usually empowered to collect property and sales taxes. Last section. State power and federal funding. Sometimes the federal government would like to pass a nationwide law, but because of the state-federal power split, it can't. But in some cases, it can influence states to change their own laws. This is because over time, cash-strapped states have become more and more dependent on federal money in order to provide services to state citizens. One example is federal highway funds. Years ago, research showed many fatal accidents were caused by young people who had been drinking. So the federal government didn't have the power to raise the drinking age, so in 1984, it told states that they would not receive highway funds unless they raised the state drinking age to 21. All the states have since complied. Over here to the right, federal money is a controversial subject. Some believe the federal government should not restrict how states use federal money. Others believe restrictions are an important tool. No matter what your thoughts are on that, however, one thing can be certain here, that state governments and local governments alike exercise just as much power, if not more, on certain specified issues. And we're going to look at that more in depth in our next reading on the COVID-19 crisis and federalism at work. Thank you very much for tuning in. Remember, finish answering those key concept questions fully and then move on with the rest of the lesson. Thank you.